All right, hello there. Now, you may notice that I usually do recordings for astrology videos in a different room, and what I have behind me is a modular synth setup. Um, I've been motivated recently to switch things up and start recording more stuff down here in this other room. Um, So just bear with me if this is a bit for people who follow my videos. I'm sure you'll be able to get used to it. Um, Today, I'm thinking about a specific transit coming up to do with the planet Uranus moving into Gemini from Taurus. And I'd like to introduce this video by saying there are some obvious things to do with this transit just based on the current events and the current state of political insanity that we're dealing with that I have to admit could be a cause for some kind of concern and all that. However, um, from my perspective, it could be because I'm a Canadian and I feel a certain degree of separation from the politics of the United States. Um, it's not something. Well, whatever. I'm going to be doing something where with some of my videos, I may focus directly on politics and world events and all that kind of stuff. But in this case, there's some other idea that I have, and I have to admit that I have a practice sometimes of like using tarot cards to help me hone in on what idea I should go for or what idea seems to be the most, or whatever is the strongest resonance or whatever, right? And I was led away from talking about things like the war in Iran or all the American politics or all the chaos and all this kind of stuff. And to think about something else, which specifically on my mind is a idea called anti-memetics. And I was introduced to this idea of anti-memetics from a YouTube channel called the Stoa. And I have to admit that I'm the Stoa is producing a lot of great content that's really relevant to my interests, and I'm considering, I don't know, maybe I should become a Patreon supporter or join up with the Stoa or something. But there's something about the video that they did on anti-memetics that the person, it kind of went in this certain direction where I thought that the idea was very promising, but it seemed to get caught up in a very specific kind of, like, a lot of it had to do with thinking about the like a confession to a Catholic, a Catholic confessing your sins in the privacy of like a Catholic confession booth, in the sense that like there maybe you've got things that are on your mind or things that you're thinking about or things that you want to talk about or things that are going on in your life, but just based on the way that social media works, that some certain things that you might think about or some certain things that you might want to talk about or some life events that are going on do not lend themselves to being things that you want to just like share and advertise publicly. And that itself leads to this idea of the anti-meme, or like something that does not really lend itself towards sharing. They also talked about this kind of like I have been boycotting Facebook and Meta and Twitter and all those kind of things. And so there's also this sort of topic of just like withdrawing from social media or withdrawing from sharing things, or like, I could go to like, when I was younger, let's say back in like, I used to do a lot of book shopping, right? I used to go to like secondhand bookstores and buy a bunch of books, and then I would like take pictures of the books and then like post my book haul and be like, look at all the book. These are the books that I got. And then people on the internet would be like, you'd share it and somebody would, oh yeah, that one's pretty good. Or like, yeah, that, I don't know if I like that guy is a bit over, but like everything you're doing, you're documenting it and then sharing it and then getting like feedback from people online, and you're just constantly engaged in this process where like everything you have to do, you have to share and you have to make public. And so that was kind of like the direction where this conversation was going. But there's some other, the reason why I'm focusing on this is that if you think about the planet Uranus, the planet Uranus often is associated with the idea of a breakthrough. And that could be in terms of a technological breakthrough. Like there's some kind of like new technology that comes from out of nowhere, disrupts things, and then all of a sudden it's really popular. Like it has this breakaway success, right? And the idea of like going viral on social media is, in one hand, it's similar to that, because like somebody who's like a complete unknown could go from like 0 to 100 really quick by unexpectedly making something that goes viral and then getting really popular. But then there's like this kind of thing of like, there's certain things that like lend themselves to that kind of virality, and then some things that really just don't. And I mean, there's also like, what tends to be happening, I find, is that there's like, I don't know, like, I don't want to take pot shots at like really trashy stuff that goes viral. So I'm not even going to indulge that, right? Because it's too easy to just like, so I think sometimes the things that go viral or the things that get really popular, if they're kind of stupid, it's like like part of the reason why they go viral is not just because of the merits of the thing, but the more you react to it, even if it's negative, it gives the thing that you're reacting to a kind of, like any publicity is good publicity kind of thing, right? So there's this kind of thing of like, anyways, in this whole idea, what I noticed is that also, when it comes to AI, not just specifically using like AI chatbots or AI image or video generation or anything like that, but the AI algorithms that run, the social media recommendations or whatever, or I have this thing where it's just like it seems like everything that you do now is getting like scooped up by some, like you're giving off what they call digital exhaust, and that's always getting scooped up by some kind of algorithm. And like some of that seems to be useful to feed the algorithm in terms of like, oh, this like, like if you buy a certain product, then your news feed is completely clogged with that product. Or if you Google a certain thing, then your feed is completely clogged up with a certain thing. But then there's other things that if you Google or you look for, it doesn't seem to register at all, right? And this is where I didn't find that they really talked about this enough. And I would also just like to clear this up of why I'm focusing on this for this particular transit, is that a lot of people talk about Uranus as a planet to do with technology, as well as to do with this breakthrough. And it could be like this breakthrough of popularity, or like this breakthrough of success, or this breakthrough of like getting an idea that was unknown and getting it out there or something like that. But then if you start to just like pay attention to like what kinds of ideas seem to proliferate in the algorithm versus which ones do not, it doesn't really seem to be like an even playing field at all, or that there seems to be like, I mean, one of the things that you could say is that the system of the internet is inherently mixed up with this thing called techno-capital, right? Which is like the money-making engine of capitalism combined with the technological engine of new technology, right? And that if your idea is somehow helps capitalism and technology grow and develop, then what you're seen as doing is contributing something to techno-capital, and you're seen to be contributing to that. But if your idea does not help techno-capital, it probably, maybe that's the reason why. Maybe if you're making an idea that doesn't help techno-capital, it doesn't proliferate in the same way, right? But I've just noticed that I have to admit that my astrology channel is not doing very well recently. And in trying to like problem solve what might be wrong with my astrology channel, I started to realize that in my own experimentation with exploring different ideas, I've hit upon certain ideas which may act as anti-memes in a way, right? Like the presence of certain ideas creates this thing where not only are they not going viral, but they may actually be shadow banned even by using certain ideas or taking certain approaches or something like that, and ending up being relegated to like the dustbin of the algorithm where you're being deprioritized in everybody's news feeds and nobody's watching your videos or something like that, right? And I think this whole problem goes really well with this Uranus into Gemini, because as soon as Uranus goes to Gemini, it's hitting a trine to Pluto in Aquarius, and Pluto is often described as the shadow or the repressed or the exile, like some kind of thing that is, there's some kind of power and control and manipulation that's going on that involves the willful repression of certain ideas at the expense of the amplification of other ones, right? And so what I'm kind of realizing, I mean, there may be. I'm gonna give you an example of this, right? And the thing is, I also want to just say is that my intention of what I'm doing with this video is, I am experimenting by recording in a different room, and it just so happens that this room is where I have my electronic music set up, and I have it set up beside this piano here because I have the opportunity to do some electroacoustic stuff where it's not just electronic, but I can have like live recording and sampling of acoustic instruments and just kind of go wild with it in this room, right? And I don't want to just turn this into like shameless self-promotion, but I did just release a Bandcamp album, which I will link in the description. Although I don't know if it's anything any of my astrology audience cares for. I'm just kind of having fun, experimenting, playing around, all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that if you look at my Bandcamp album, I was approaching the issue of creating Bandcamp album artwork in a certain way where it feels these days that like anything you do on the computer or online, like I said, there's like the algorithms. There's the algorithms are almost like little like bacteria or like mold or fungus that are just looking for something to grow on, right? And it's like any kind of information that you create seems to feed these algorithms, right? And so I decided to throw in a bunch of unnecessary language or unnecessary words into my album cover art and make it in a small font so it's like hard to read. And then like from there, see if the words that I put onto my Bandcamp album cover art had any effect on the algorithm, or which ones did have an effect or which ones didn't, right? And I also wrote I also wrote a Substack post kind of describing sort of my mentality going into this. And I have to admit that I'm not a successful musician at all. There's a certain, if you're persisting with a project that you don't have any basic sign of, I have to admit, I do appreciate the few people that have bought some of my music on Bandcamp to support me. But it's nowhere near as much as, let's say, what I would make from like a single astrology reading, right? Like I could do an astrology reading, a natal chart reading for somebody and make enough money on one astrology reading than what I would make on Bandcamp for like 6 years or something, right? Like it's like there's no way I'm nowhere close to actually having a musician being a productive business, even although it's nice to it feels good to have some people chip in a few bucks to make, that some people like it enough to support me or whatever. But it's just easier to make money doing astrology. I honestly haven't been doing lots of chart readings all the time, but when I do, you make more money. But I'm not in it for the money, basically, right? But there is, but anyways, what I'm trying to say here with my Bandcamp album cover artwork is that I included a number of different words in that, and like, for example, like what I've noticed is that if you talk about things which are like hot topics for, let's say, the culture war, I think a great example of this is anything relating to LGBTQ stuff or transgender issues. And then this is especially what's going on with the politics in the United States, where it's a very divisive issue, right? Where the Trump regime has really come down hard on transgender people by making it so that you have to either register with the government as a man or a woman, and they're being as aggressive as possible to like transgender programs, right? And so there's this kind of thing where it's kind of funny because like it's an issue that I have to admit affects a very small amount of people. Because if you really care about something like whether or not trans people are included in like PE or high school sports programs, and like you might have like a high school with like thousands of kids or 1,000 kids, and there might only be like 2 trans people. So like if you're going to start you're not going to allow trans people to go into the other PE class. You're going to have to it's just. There's something about it where it's like this extreme minority, and where it affects a very, very, very few amount of people. And yet because it's such a highly charged issue that people care a lot about, and it can be very triggering for emotions, the algorithm seems to be geared in such a way where it takes something like that, and if you say anything about trans people, it just is going to like spike it up and try to track if somebody, you're going to be like making, if people really, or like if you say something, if it shows you that there's this highly contentious issue that you care about, then it's going to be like, oh, this is a great way to emotionally manipulate people, because things that you are invested in, that you care about, that feel passionately about, it's a good way that we can just show you the, things that are going to trigger you, things that are going to piss you off, things that are going to make you angry and stuff like that. And we're going to take those kind of things and just like jack them up so that they come up to the top of the feed. And then, but there's certain other things that I included in there that don't seem to register at all. And this is what I'm realizing, is that I'm in my own process of kind of finding things which inspire me, or things that I'm enthusiastic about, or things that are kind of like, that I'm interested in, or just for the fact of being like, this is the shit that I'm interested in. I had to admit, I'm not particularly, I support trans people, but I'm not really that interested in it as like something like a problem to like have opinions about, or get into a debate about, or something like that. But there are things that I've always been inspired by. One of which is that way back in 2010, I went to Australia, and I spent a whole year living in Australia. And there's a movement in of an alternative form of, like, I guess you could call it organic gardening, that came out of Australia, called permaculture. And so I'm just giving this as an example where it's like, what I did was, in my Bandcamp album cover, I included some words like transgender, intersex, refugee, things. I also I said fake autism, and like, I noticed after uploading my Bandcamp album, having all these kinds of things like autism, and being queer and transgender, and having kind of like heteronormativity stuff, all this kind of stuff really pings the algorithm really well. But in the midst of this, there doesn't seem, including the word permaculture in there, doesn't seem to have any effect at all, right? And then what I also noticed is that there's a certain turning point in which, when I was creating content for or creating astrology videos about different, I included this idea of permaculture gardening, I think, in one of my videos, and it got like 0 likes, which I found kind of weird, because it was sort of like, it was also, there's something about the permaculture thing which I've noticed is a great example of anti-mimetics at work, right? And I have to admit that even by including the topic of permaculture in this video, I may be shooting myself in the foot. I may be self-sabotaging myself. I may be intentionally including this thing that is not going to get popular, is not going to generate success, and all that kind of stuff. But you know, I have to admit, I'm at a kind of a low point in this channel where I'm on a streak of like nobody liking my videos. So it's kind of, at this point in time, you know, I don't think I'm necessarily losing anything by taking this risk, but it's like, what I'm noticing is that just this kind of my own attachment to wanting to be, at least gets it. The thing is, I have conflicting drives and motivations when it comes to like seeking popularity on YouTube, because a lot of what, I don't know, maybe it's just a cop-out to say a lot of what gets popular is kind of trashy, and I don't want to try to be Mr. Beast or something like that. But there's something about it where I do admittedly feel better if people like my videos, and I'm kind of disappointed or pissed off if the stuff that I make doesn't get any likes or doesn't get any popularity or anything like that. And the fact that I have at least any attachment to being to getting popularity from my little YouTube channel here, or getting any kind of success from my little YouTube channel, it creates this thing where I have to like take inventory of what kind of ideas that I include in my astrology videos and what kind of ideas that I choose to omit in my astrology videos. And to me, the fact that something that I have genuine enthusiasm for or genuine interest in seems to be something that I need to censor or omit. And then what I find really funny about this is that this isn't like in the Stoa, they're talking about like having to go to like your Catholic priest and like confess your sins because there's something that's just so socially unacceptable that you can't speak, you don't feel comfortable speaking about it openly, or like, you know, like sometimes it's like, you know, it's understandable that maybe if it's something to do with like, I don't know, like sex or like, you know, your own personal, you know, moral failings or something like that, like it may be something that you don't feel like just broadcasting publicly to the world, and it's better to have a certain appropriate space to do this. But when it comes to like alternative forms of gardening, there shouldn't be any like, oh, I'm so ashamed to be into permaculture, I have to like hide this, this is so embarrassing that I'm like, I'm, you know, like it doesn't make any sense at all why permaculture would be this thing. Like I can only like permaculture is like an indication of my moral failure as a human being, and I have to like go to my Catholic priest and be like, yes, Father, forgive me, I have sinned, because instead of having like a really boring lawn, I'm growing a multiple I'm growing strawberries on my front lawn, and because of this, it's a sign of personal laziness, because instead of being a hardworking, productive member of society who goes out and pays out my ass for strawberries from the grocery store, I just get them for free from my front lawn. And, you know, it's incredibly lazy because, you know, like these strawberries just grow on their own. And then next year, you don't even have to plant their perennials. So the strawberries just stay there year after year, and just like you don't have to do very little work, and yet you're rewarded with fruits and stuff like that. And it creates this atmosphere where a lot of really hardworking guys put a lot of sweat and they get out there and push their lawnmower and put a lot of energy into like making their lawn a certain way. And there's a lot of hardworking guys who don't have the time and energy to do that, and so they have to make a lot of money to pay landscaping crews to do this and stuff like that. And, you know, we actually, the thing is, like, I've converted part of my front lawn, so it's just like a whole bunch of strawberries. And it's like, I have like, I guess I could also create a video where I show this off and I show you all what's going on in my permaculture garden. But, you know, what I've learned about, you know, dealing with the algorithm on YouTube is that if I do this, it's basically like algorithmic suicide. It's basically like you are you're showing something to the world that's inherently, I don't even want to say, you know, I'm not even sure how to describe it, but there's something about this whole kind of dynamic where it's like, the engine of the economy is like, whoa, boy, food at the grocery store is really expensive. You know, in order to, if I can't afford food, I'm not going to be able to survive. So if I got to figure out, and if I'm not making any money off my astrology channel, I got to figure out a way to like figure out how to make my videos more popular so I can make more money to buy this really expensive food. But oh yeah, I forgot, I have a permaculture garden that just produces free strawberries for me every year. And like, I don't, not only do I just get this food that I grow myself for free, I don't even have to like, you know, I don't even have to bother like, you know, go leaving to go to the grocery store. I just go to my front lawn and pick strawberries, right? And there's something about all this which just like doesn't, the algorithm isn't friendly towards this at all, right? And there's also like this whole kind of atmosphere about like a lot of there's like the tone or the atmosphere of like the neighborhood where I live is like constant lawnmowers, constant weed eaters, and that kind of stuff. And part of the permaculture thing is that we hire these landscapers. I was actually not even living here when we converted to a permaculture garden, but my mother hired a bunch of landscapers to replace part of our lawn with a permaculture garden. And it's actually designed in such a way that instead of weed eating the permaculture garden, there are, if you do want to like, you know, it's not like completely like you don't weed it. It does actually take some work to weed it and pull things out, but like it's made in such a way where you do this lasagna gardening thing where it's actually, you can just go in by hand and like pull out the weeds, and it's like it creates this different like it takes what starts to happen is you start spending less time running these machines which either run on gas or electric battery power and make a lot of noise, and you're more just like chilling out quietly in your garden, like picking out the little weeds and stuff like that, and in the shade and stuff. Like, it's just like completely different atmosphere. But it sort of is like, because like it doesn't seem, there's something about what it seems to represent a kind of like laziness. Even if you're like, oh, I'm gonna go out and like weed in my garden for an hour, like you're only working hard if you're making a whole bunch of noise. And that if like you're like somebody, if your neighbor is like trying to relax and like take it easy, and you're not just making a whole bunch of noise with a really loud like pressure washer or lawnmower or weed eater, it like, and you're just chilling out in the shade with some like plants, you come off as like a lazy asshole. It doesn't work because you're just like, oh, I'm just relaxing in the shade in my garden like a privileged little asshole, while all these hardworking dudes have to push their lawnmowers around, right? And I think there's something about like it's like there's something about this where it just sort of feels like the more I try to promote my appreciation for this one style of landscaping over the other, I start to feel like there's this whole industry built around doing landscaping a certain way, which, you know, because in America, the three biggest employers are the U.S. military, Walmart, and Home Depot, right? The more that you are able to build the more you convert your lawn into permaculture, the less you're going to need to go to Home Depot to buy all these things like weed eaters, lawnmowers, leaf blowers. Like, there's a whole industry around this. And basically, there's this whole industry that can make all this money by selling these products. And what you're doing is you're diverting that energy into a bunch of landscapers who convert your lawn into such a thing where you basically eliminate the need for all these products, and you get to chill out in your garden and relax, and then everybody resents you for it, basically, right? And that the algorithm just turns you into public enemy number one, basically, right? Or else the algorithm is just like doesn't know what to do with it, and that if you talk about other things like being like you know, gender nonconformity or transgender stuff, they're gonna they want to make that the battleground culture war issue. They don't want people to talk about like landscaping and gardening and like in the midst of all this. It's really interesting because I saw in the news that the NDP, the left-wing Socialist Party in Canada, has a guy from I don't know, somewhere in Ontario, is a guy who is an organic farmer who is trying to run for NDP leadership. And it's really interesting. I find that there's like the way that my interest in organic gardening is like if I focus on something like organic gardening rather than, you know, all these really volatile topics such as like, you know, the deportation or, you know, riots in Los Angeles or the war in Iran, if I'm just like, okay, this is kind of crazy, good thing I'm Canadian at least, I'm just gonna like chill out and like self-care, work in my garden and like focus on organic gardening. Like the way that the YouTube algorithm picks this up is that it shows me, there's this video that came up which is like the origins of organic gardening, and it's like a bunch of like fascist cults there's this, they're trying, or like it's really funny that there's also this whole movement or like this kind of like meme around eco-fascism, where it's like if you're interested in organic gardening and you're interested in like environmentalism, the algorithm is only going to pick this up and make it viral insofar as it's coded as being, you're an eco-fascist, basically, right? And there's this whole rhetoric with like the I don't know. I had to put up with this because because my sister is like hardcore vegan, and there's this whole thing where it's just like me and my mom are not vegan, but we cohabit with my sister who is vegan, and like it seems like whatever things I don't have anything against vegans, and actually I can appreciate vegan food. I just, you know, sometimes I personally like eating meat, and I'm not going to go full on vegan, right? But it's like there's so many. The thing about this is that I feel like it's like, you know, there's something about even like the vegan thing where like if you were to like go back in time to like, let's say, the 1960s, when things like organic gardening and like vegetarianism or whatever, things like that got popular with the hippie movement or whatever, there was like nothing against the vegans, but like if you notice how like there's certain things become more polarized to a degree where it becomes kind of comical almost, where it's like, it's not, you know, like it's not good enough to be like vegetarian. You have to be like full on vegan. Like if I get the tiniest little bit of an animal product in my body, it's like I've committed a sin. Like I am impure. I am like, and so I'm like, you know, you have to be like this absolute, like I can never eat anything that has anything to do with animals at all. And I'm going to be like completely hardline against this. And this is going to be like my fight against the world. And it's like really extreme. It's like, or else like there's this kind of thing where it's like that has been, like, you know, it's like you can't anything that you are doing, if you're doing it this way, we're like, oh yeah, we're just like, you know, we're an accommodating, tolerant family, and if you want to eat meat, you can. If you don't want to eat meat, you can. We'll accommodate everybody. They don't really like that kind of mentality of like, we're gonna promote the principle of like, you know, we're gonna cooperate despite our differences and work as a team despite our differences of opinion or different points of view or something like that. It seems more likely that what the algorithm promotes is trying to take things which could be like anything that could be like common ground. We're like, hey, isn't it interesting how some people, which would be described as like more like, you know, it's actually a point of convergence where people who might identify as left or right might actually agree that they don't want to have pesticides or GMOs or hormones in their food, but like you don't want to have some sort of point where people might actually agree on things and not hate each other, right? Or like being tolerant towards people who have different ideas. You got to make it so everything's as absolutely polarized and violently opposed as possible, or that instead of having just like easy go, like people being like, yeah, we like organic gardening and we don't care who you vote for or what your politics are, we we can all get together and agree on what's healthy for us or something like that. No, it's got to be like, you got to take that idea and make it like totalitarian eco-fascism, where if you like, it's either like the meat eaters or the vegans, the soy boys versus like the Jordan Peterson all carnivore diet people, and push these things to the craziest extremes and make them fight, and then like create like, you know, what gets popular on YouTube is like the Jubilee episode where you have 12 vegans versus 12 meat eaters, face off, battle royale, you know, cage match, death, and it's like, this is like kind of thing. It's like, that's the atmosphere. I feel like the algorithm, like it's like, you have to do this thing where it's like my family, I have to like, you know, I have to just like, it's like, you have this sort of atmosphere with my family where it's like, we're going to agree to cooperate and get along and all this kind of stuff. And then you look at your phone and all of it is just like, if you don't eat meat, you're a soy boy, or like, you know, or like the man has to like break free from the chains of the oppressive, like feminizing forces who just want him to eat tofu all, you know. It's just like, there's what I'm trying to say. It's like, there's, it's just absurd, right? And there's something about this where it's like, I think the anti-memetics, what I'm trying to say is that there's like this force of anti-memetics where the things that go viral are the things which drive polarization, which drive violent opposition, which drive conflict, and any like the things that which would create solidarity, understanding, common ground, cooperation are anti-memetic in nature. Because, and especially, I think it's like, I don't know if I'm getting a different algorithm because I'm Canadian, like, or like there's this kind of thing that like, if you exhibit the wrong opinions or the wrong point of view or the wrong position, then you become the enemy of the algorithm, and it's just targets you with all the, it's just trying to make you change by being like, oh, if you keep promoting these ideas, you're never going to get popular. The only way you're going to get popular is by playing into this thing where it's us versus them, and we're going to go to war. And like, instead of have like they don't want to have like a picture of a family where you have people who like meat and people who are vegans sitting at the same table, not fighting. Like, they're going to be like, oh, this is an opportunity to make everybody in this family hate each other and have them split off and atomize into, so that they're like isolated individuals who are now vulnerable to capitalist exploitation, basically. I mean, it's pretty simple, I would say, right? So I don't know. I'm in this kind of zone right now where I'm not really interested in just noticing the way that popular astrology channels are and trying to like imitate what the formula for popular success is, because to me there's nothing really creative or interesting about that. I might as well just do something else, right? I've always been attracted to exploring the ideas that are not getting promoted. And, you know, maybe I'm just going to be like lingering around in the most unwatched parts of YouTube, making content that is completely deprioritized by the algorithms, or that only, you know, just like, but, you know, if this, there's something about, especially with the permaculture thing, that it's just like, it seems so crazy to me that, that the things that I think, certain things that seem like there's a certain quality to some certain ideas that are inspiring to me, that maybe it goes with the fact that the internet is becoming more and more, it just feels like you're like, to go online is like this gravitational force that's like pulling you down, right? And that what feels like, you know, maybe it's better just to not talk about permaculture and just to like hang out in my permaculture garden and, you know, have that as my kind of like restorative self-care kind of thing that helps me. But like, shouldn't the internet be a place where you can be like, hey guys, like this, like in these crazy times where it's like the going online seems like an actively degrading to your mental health and your sanity and all this kind of stuff. These are certain things that I've found which help me to, you know, they don't want, no, they're not going to promote that. They want to just like, it feels like it's like intentionally as toxic and degrading and polarizing and as divisive as possible, right? To the extent where I even question, do I want to, is it even worth it to use these platforms in the first place? Or is it just like, am I just asking for trouble by even like persisting on making a YouTube channel, right? And so, I mean, I also, like, I have to admit though, I don't know, at some point in time, I have to admit that maybe there's some kind of, I don't know, do I like the trashiness of YouTube, or is it like a trash content addiction or something? Like, why do I keep using, I don't know, I'm basically in this position where I have purged myself. I'm not using any social media. I'm using Facebook to sell some stuff, but I'm basically boycotting social media in general. And the only habit forming platform or app that I'm dealing with is YouTube. And it more and more, it just starts to feel like some malignant force that the things that are, it's going to try to promote the things which are toxic and unhelpful for me, and the things that actually help me in terms of, you know, being a support for my sanity and well-being. It's going to make it seem like this, if I talk about that, I'm basically never going to be popular, right? The things that actually help me to stay healthy and stable, if I talk about, it's not going to get popular. It's going to be an anti-meme, and it's going to be treated as if it's like some terrible sin that I'd have to confess to like, forgive me, Father, I'm unable to have a white picket fence with a perfectly manicured lawn, and I have all these sinful, you know, wildflowers and you know, and plants and vegetables growing in my lawn because I'm a terribly bad person who's given over to the pagan forces of Mother Earth, and I don't respect the you know, the hardworking landscapers who push lawnmowers around all day. Right? Like that's kind of how the vibe feels like, right? And I'm basically, I don't know if you can see if this is too much of a tangent for the astrology, but for me, the fact that Pluto is the thing that's repressed, the thing that's hidden, the thing that's squished down, or that kind of act of like, there's something unconscious, right? And Uranus being like, it could be a breakthrough to popularity, it could be a breakthrough to success, but then in that trine to Pluto, it's being shaped by these coercive forms of power and domination and control and inequality. And then both of those are being sextiled by the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is like, there's some kind of, I don't know. To me, the Saturn and Neptune sort of feels like the sort of standard for like conformity that is just kind of oppressive, right? Like there's this kind of thing that, like, you know, if you want to be one of us, if you want to be one of the big boys, you got to do it our way, right? If you want to be accepted into your community, accepted into society, there are certain rules and standards you have to adhere by. And if you want to grow a permaculture garden, you're clearly just like a worthless pagan, what could I say? Like, you are a heretic, basically, right? Like, the good, upstanding Christian man is a hardworking lawnmower pusher, and you're a filthy, like, queer pagan, you know, whatever you would say. You're like some dirty thing crawling around in the leaves if you like permaculture, right? And it's like there's a certain ickiness that goes with, like, oh my God, you don't rake your leaves, you know, like, you got to get the big vroom vroom. The big vroom leaf blowers in, you know, pronto, because you know, we can't have this. We can't have this sort of thing that's standing out in a non-conformist way, right? But I think there's this thing about Uranus, which is all about kind of breaking those conventions, and it's sort of like I kind of feel like there's this pressure in that what used to be encouraging, like what was fun about the internet way back in the day, in the like the Y2K era, is that this would be a place where alternative ideas could proliferate, right? It could be like, oh wow, like we're so used to this sort of like this standard of normality that we get from like cable TV and cable news and all this, and then the internet in contrast is this cool alternative space where you can learn about all these like underground, cultural ideas. And now the internet is just taken over by the mainstream, and if you try to talk about permaculture, sorry man, you're gonna have to talk up. Like, I don't think we're gonna have a Jubilee permaculture episode where you have a bunch of permaculturists versus the landscapers fighting with you, or maybe prove me wrong, Jubilee. Maybe we will get a highly polarized rage bait conversation with the permacultures fighting the landscapers about for domination, right? Like or you could put them in a cage match and give them knives and have like a knife fight between the permacultures and the traditional landscape. Like this is basically, it feels like what we're like, because of the domination or the predominance of this sort of like manosphere, Joe Rogan, Andrew Tate kind of mentality, that you're not going to be popular. Like, you gotta think about this. Is the idea that you're putting forth, could it be compatible for like throw them in the cage match, right? Rather than having a rational conversation, we're just going to have like two guys like duke it out and like who hate each other and they're going to kill each other. And if you can like, if it works for that, it's going to be successful. But if it's like, if you're like, oh, this is something that organic gardening is great because both right-wing people and left-wing people love this idea of like, going back to nature and having, planting your roots and touching grass and itself, if you can have people coming together and cooperating and working as a team and being friends, like that's not going to do very well online, right? What we want, what gets popular online is whatever is the most divisive, whatever the most rage baity, whatever works in terms of deteriorating your mental health, turning you against your friends and family and neighbors, and making everybody hate each other, to the fact where it helps it creates more crime and violence and justifies an authoritarian police state. I mean, that's basically how I've figured it out, right? So I don't know. What I'm trying to say is that going into this Uranus and Gemini ingress, it's kind of frustrating that this is the way it is, at least how I'm perceiving it. But maybe if we just stay with that frustration, that maybe there will be a kind of a breakthrough that will disrupt that mentality, that will create, a different atmosphere for different ideas to proliferate, right? Otherwise, it could also be, I'm kind of thinking that what if the answer is, instead of doing that, is to make zines or something, right? Or like to try to use older forms of media. So instead of talking about permaculture on the internet, you like make printed like pamphlets and you like distribute those to people. But what's interesting about even that is, like, I don't know, you don't want to go too much in the doomer conspiracy theorist direction, but I've heard people say that with this current like panopticon surveillance capitalism control society kind of thing that we're in, which goes very well with this Pluto and Aquarius, which is going to be trining this Uranus and Gemini. There's this apparently when you use a printer, the printers these days are, I've heard this idea that apparently printers, anything that you print out in a printer is like somehow communicated. Like, you can't, if you're going to be printing like some kind of material that could get you in trouble on a printer, you're not actually, just be aware that apparently everything you're printing out in your printer isn't private, right? So if you print something that the powers that be may not like you to be printing, like, you may be attracting the wrong kind of attention, not even by publishing on the internet, by publishing offline too. And now I unfortunately voted for Mark Carney, and Mark Carney has put in these bills like, the government has every right to go through your mail, right? So if you were like, these ideas don't proliferate very well online. I'm gonna send I'm gonna write a letter and send it to the people in the mail. You could have the government, it's not that, what the Soviet Union used to do, where they would go through everybody's mail and like they would they'd cross out, censor people's letters to each other, or they would like intercept letters and rewrite the, it's even here in Canada, it's getting kind of scary like that, right? And it just feels like, it's hard to be a creative person who's interested in alternative ideas when it feels like even if I were to start typing, I'm going to like write a draft in a word processing document on my computer. And then if that computer's online, then the AI is going to be picking that up and feeding it back. And then I'm going to be getting the algorithms going to be trying to tell me to like, oh, this guy is, writing about something alternative that doesn't go with the mainstream stuff. Oh, time to send him some algorithms that are going to make him more mentally unstable, or make him angry, or deteriorate his mental health. And then it's, I don't know if that sounds too paranoid though, but it's what it kind of comes off like, right? Versus like if you start to, you have to also, maybe there's something like if you do something that they like, they're going to reward. It's like, they have little they're going to reward you for certain behaviors. They're going to punish you for certain behaviors. And that, the main thing, they don't want anybody, they want people to be as isolated, divided, atomized as possible. And the thing that they really don't like is people that have maybe conflicting opinions actually cooperating with each other and resolving their differences, because then they actually have strength in numbers. We don't want that. We don't want people to be as fractured, balkanized, individualized as possible, with basically no capacity to cooperate, build community, or work together in a team. That we basically want to create a situation where if anybody thinks differently from you, you can only think about that in terms of like how do I beat this person in like a cage match to the death, right? And like it's just like that's basically the mentality, right? Unfortunately, so anyways, this is basically my attempt to report on where I'm at going into this upcoming Uranus into Gemini transit, and specifically thinking about it in context with this trine to Pluto, this sextile to Saturn and Neptune. Okay, thank you for watching.